Howdy. Welcome to another episode of Connect This. Last week was the first time I just started off with a simple howdy, and it got such a good reaction from Kim and Travis. I thought I'd start that again. We're gonna have a really fun show today. We have two first-time guests, two people that I think very highly of in terms of both their experience and their ability to give and take and have a fun conversation. So let's just roll into talking about who's here. I'll start off with Heather Gold, who is with HBG Strategies. Gonna go ahead and guess your middle name starts with a B, Heather?
Yes, Burnett.
You know, and I actually knew that. So Heather and I met when you were at the Fiber to the Home Council, I think.
Right.
Yeah, for North America and or for the Americas, I guess. Is that right?
Yes, for the Americas.
So what's HBG Strategies
doing? What are we doing? Well,
Yeah.
we're doing a lot of broadband education, market visibility work for different companies, but working a lot with people at broadband communities or vendors or communities that need more information about broadband and how to reach out. I don't personally know enough to be an engineer and teach them that stuff, but I know who knows. So my job is to connect them with the people that have the answers to what they know. And I think given my background as association executive, that's the ideal job for me.
I'm in a similar position, but I tend not to admit it publicly.
Oh.
So we also have Milo Medin joining us. Milo is a former vice president of wireless services at Google, and a person who has just everyone seems to know behind the scenes, but I think you're so quiet, Milo, that people who've been doing this work for 5 years might not know who you are. So welcome to the show. I'm excited that you could join us.
Well, Chris, it's great to be here. It's been fun to catch up with you over the years, and always fun, and conversations always learn something as well. So it's great.
So now let me see if I got this right, and you can correct me gently or not as you wish. But more than 10 years ago, someone at Google, one of the founders, I think, said we need to do something about the broadband stuff, and they went off and said we're going to do open access fiber, and we're going to change the whole landscape. And then they're like, who can we have run this? And they brought you in, and you said, okay, it's a great idea, but why don't we do something that I think would work?
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting. Companies go through different phases. I came to Google back in December of 2010 to lead the fiber program, and at that time there was a competition that they had decided to try and run to go recruit cities, right, to see who would be interested in a test network. I think you could do better than that in terms of building a real business and trying to build fiber infrastructure in a different way. If you remember at the time, I think the mean speed that my friends in the cable companies were offering were about 10 megabits per second. And I was, I helped build DOCSIS. I was the founder of a company called At Home Network. So I know a lot about the HFC network because we worked with Comcast and Charter and they're called something else at the time, and TCI and all those folks to go build cable broadband service. And so, working in a field trying to go compete with something you've built before is always a lot of fun. So we decided to try and actually make that be a product. Larry Page was always very focused on connectivity as one of the sort of main obstacles to consumption of internet and data. And so Google's been, wanted to go do something in that space. I led that program for a while, and he was on my case about wireless. Like, why aren't we doing more on the wireless side? So they backfilled for me on the fiber side, and I have run wireless services until December 1, when I left Google after not quite 11 years. But it's a much bigger company today. It's a great company. Some of the smartest people you will find work there. But I thought it would be more fun to do something at a little bit smaller place than 180,000 people.
Sure. Yes. And And I wanted to just sort of get at that open access issue, because I feel like it can both be true that I'm a huge proponent of open access, and also recognize that it might not be the right approach for a company like Google. So,
I would just say, and this may be a somewhat controversial statement, but one of the problems that you have with an open access system is, what's the product? So if you want to work with cities, if you want to work with people that are to help access to rights of way, et cetera, and you say, here's what you get. This is what your city will have. They go, well, what's the product? And, well, depends on what people want to offer. What exactly does that mean, right? And so if you want cooperation, if you want to have people be excited, if you want, folks to have impact in a community, see the impact, you have to talk about, well, what is the product? So is it a gigabit? Is it, what's the price? And so the problem with the open access model is the people who are trying to build the network can't speak to the product that will be offered. And so until you can actually have some real product offerings that people can see, yeah, this is what makes my community more competitive. This is what will happen to education in my community.
mm-hmm.
People are not just engineers. Well, glass is great. Of course, fiber is great. But like, at what price and at what speed and what can I do with it, right? So I think that's a real challenge if you want to do something creative when it comes to construction. For commodity, sure, but broadband is not really a commodity in the U.S., as you probably have noticed.
I think the example we've seen that have been successful is which would be contrary to what Google wanted, is when the community actually owns the fiber. And so what they're selling, Milo, is they know how to construct and build infrastructure. And you see that a lot with public utilities, and they can advocate to their citizens, hey, this is something we know. Mm-hmm. Running a telecom service is not what we know. And Chris and I have talked about this a lot. And Chris, tell me if I'm going down a rat hole here, but the main challenge, I think, to open access is not necessarily who builds and owns the infrastructure, because you can dictate, we're putting enough infrastructure out there that we expect every ISP on this network to offer a minimum of a gigabit. The problem is having enough subscribers in a given community to make it a profitable offering for any ISP that wants to join.
Yeah. I mean, this is something we can definitely come back to. I want to introduce Travis, but let me just finish off that thought, Heather. I agree with what you just said. In particular, I try to explain it to people in the media like this. Open access can be great. The challenge can be if it has to pay entirely for itself. And you can imagine the problem such that it is difficult to build a fiber network where you take 100% of the revenue and apply it to your costs. Open access doesn't give you 100% of the revenue to apply to your costs. So of course, it's going to be more difficult under that model. So Travis, man about town, apparently, you're not frozen out. You're gonna go leave your home for dinner.
Well, so I guess it's time to ask the question that both Milo and Heather are afraid to ask. Did I win the bet from last year?
I told you it's in February.
Oh, it's in February.
I didn't look at our February shows. For some reason, February 20 is in my head.
They wanted to know, and just what was the bet again? Just so I'm clear on what I'm going to win.
So 1 year ago, Milo and Heather, on a show that we were doing, I believe with Doug Dawson and Kim McKinley, the president had been inaugurated. It was a new era. COVID was vanquished. Life was starting afresh. And I made a bet with Travis that 1 year from that day, it was inconceivable to me that the federal broadband definition would remain at 25 megabits down, 3 megabits up. Because if anything else, the Biden administration, the very first thing that they would do would be to update that definition. What I didn't count on was
he was a little on the cocky side on this one too. I'm not gonna lie, right? I mean, he 1 year, and so to give you a little bit more data, every time Chris and I have dinner for the last 5 or 6 years, generally chicken wings, I pay. So for the next year, free chicken wings are coming my way.
Yeah, I
Yep.
think that's pretty.
I
That's pretty
think it's-
obvious.
But
You don't think they're going to do it in the next 2 weeks?
No, and you know, I mean, again, look, I think, not trying to be political, but when it takes a year to pick, almost a year to pick who the FCC
The person we all
chairman
knew was going to be picked.
and you know, and put an NTIA head in place.
oh
Right?
yeah,
I mean, it's clear the administration doesn't really prioritize broadband or telecom. I mean, they just in terms of the people they pick to go lead things and make decisions. And so, you know, I mean, and right now the FCC, I think, is still stuck 2-2. So
That's
you know,
correct.
yeah.
For another maybe week or two, hopefully. I don't know how fast the floor vote, or not the floor vote. We don't know when the floor vote would be, but I believe GG will be getting out of committee this month.
Oh,
Heather,
wow.
were you going to say something?
Well, I think the administration, and Milo's right, they were so slow out of the gate getting these key executives in place. But fortunately, the legislative branch has sort of moved beyond us, and the Treasury has moved beyond the FCC. I think, if I would say one thing, I think the FCC looks really sleepy now. I mean, they're sort of behind the 8 ball on speeds, money.
Yeah, if it wasn't for how terribly the FAA is run, the FCC would look like a pretty bad agency.
Yeah.
well,
I
I mean, you know, you could just generalize that to transport in general. But yeah, I mean, we could talk about, you know, 5G and C-band if you want as well. But I would just say one thing: they did nominate Alan Davidson, who's
Been confirmed now, I believe, and seated.
Yes.
And I think he's confirmed now.
Yeah.
He's a good guy, and I think, at least based on my experience with him many years ago, I think he will want to try and advance the ball. But you know, if you look at this bill, 100 down, 20 up, you know, it's sort of building yesterday's network tomorrow. You know, is the
So
way
you're
I
talking about the infrastructure bill.
characterize that. Yeah. It's not, you know, if you think we're talking about infrastructure, like things that last 20 years, 100 down, you know, it's like you're spending, yeah, I guess NTA has 42 billion of that, of the 60 for that.
I think, no, correct me that I'm wrong.
100 down, 20 up.
No, I think anything you build has to be scalable to 100, 100. It's 100 down, 20 up is if you do not have that, then you're more likely to be qualified for areas to be invested in, right?
Great.
Right. You're
100.
underserved.
Great.
So Milo, is that a copyrighted statement, or can I steal that? Because that's hilarious.
Yeah, I think you can steal
Well,
that. It's fine.
Okay. Wow, that is fabulous, Chris. You know what you're going to be hearing every week from now on. Building.
I don't actually think it's original. I heard it somewhere else, so I don't claim that I came up with it. It's I'm pretty sure I heard it somewhere.
No one's ever said it before. We're breaking news here on the show. Henry, I think we're ready to just do a little. We're going to come back to Telecom Peek A Boo. I've selected a photo from my vast library of interesting things. I probably should have zoomed in some on it. This is a poll. I believe, Travis, that this is from the fairgrounds. And so our friend Ryan Coleman may actually have been involved with this. And I believe this was I assume that this was connectivity. I believe it was during the winter carnival where they had a bunch of snow sculptures out there, and this was to make sure cars might have Wi-Fi. I'm guessing. Does anyone recognize those pieces of gear?
Heather, Milo, take a stab at it. I have a guess.
Milo, you're the wireless guru.
Well, I mean, they could be. It could either be WISP style gear, or it could be cellular base stations, right? Just things like that. It looks, boy, outside plant is really nasty. But you know, yeah, that doesn't look like, the angles look like it's
probably, I want to say 20 feet off the ground.
Yeah.
You can tell by the trees, maybe even 15.
The question is, what's lower on the pole, right? Because if those are the
there's 6 of them.
You know, if there's not, you know, sort of what do those all things plug into? If it's
my photo
just
probably doesn't
standalone
show.
things and it's not cellular, it's probably Wi-Fi or some
Yeah.
network or something like that.
I don't see any extra power there.
Yeah, so it's probably some kind of Wi-Fi. It's not Ubiquiti or something more common.
Travis, anything to add?
I might actually, because just the way I might go DAS is what I might go. So we need to find out, because look at, you've got like you've got 6 connections coming out of the bottom of each one. But yeah,
that's what I was curious about. Like, why?
If we knew what the other end was, it might be helpful.
Yeah, but usually, I don't see any orange. So it looks like Cat5 or Ethernet that's coming. Oh, there's some orange there. Okay.
Yeah.
That could be fiber.
Well, you might have stumped us for the first time, Chris. Where is this at the fairgrounds?
Yeah. This was last year.
So can you zoom in even more on that little panel?
Yeah.
Downward and to the left. The little
right there.
There's some writing there. I can't remember. You can pick up a brain. You can.
Oh, we need the enhance button. I don't know if we have the enhance button on this package.
It's fun stuff.
Right. I'm going cellular DAS. There's 3 of them. They're directional. They've got the other end. I'm going to guess there's a cabinet down below that all of this connects into. But I think
if there's no cabinet, though, I didn't see. I don't know. Is there? Can you tell if there's a cabinet below that?
Well, it all home runs to something, right? So,
yeah, that's the question.
All right, so I think we're going to have to take this one, and we're going to have to go over there and see what it is.
I can ask. I'll ask the person at the fairgrounds who's in charge of all the tech, and he'll probably just know immediately what it was and who was responsible for it.
That's a good one. That's our that's stumper. That's a good one this week.
Cool. Also, someone might write in. For anyone who's listening, definitely feel free to send us a comment, and we will work it into the show. Most likely, if it's terrible, then we'll make fun of you and not work it into the show. So let's talk about the federal the broadband funding programs. I'm curious, and Heather, I'll start with you. I feel like the wireless folks are feel that they the fiber guys won this one. That the programs are well designed from a perspective of making sure that we're building fiber. A lot of preferences for high speeds, even an outright call encouraging states to do fiber. Did Congress get this one right?
I would hesitate to ever say that Congress got something right, but as right as they were going to get it, it's certainly a lot better than the Telecom Act of 96, that's for sure. But it is very encouraging. I'm a little bit nervous about giving all that money to the states, particularly the states that don't have an effing clue how to run a broadband program. But I'm sure that'll all sort out. Yeah, I think they did get it right. I mean, I've been on the side that's been wanting to get more fiber deployed. And even with all of the fancy 5G going out, we know that needs more fiber. So I think it really does encourage more fiber. And to Milo's point, where the speed is basically the speed below which you're deemed underserved. At least the good thing we know about fiber is it's pretty stretchable. You can increase the capacity pretty easily. So I don't think it's not like past programs where we're sort of putting people in jail for 10 years if they sign up with a certain carrier because they have no hope of anything beyond DSL. So I think that's the good news. And the other good news is the encouragement of a lot of new entrants in the market. Now we'll see how that works out with the financial reviews, but it does seem like they're really pushing governments and nonprofit entities, cooperatives to be involved, which I think is great news because we've been so constrained on opening up the market.
Excellent. So Milo, your thoughts on it?
A lot will depend on what rules are established, right? And so part of that goes back to the details. Encouragements, et cetera, are less reasonable than or less important than actually what the rules are for applying and what's the process. And Obviously, you have to start with broadband mapping, and if you don't have a good understanding of what areas are served or what isn't, then you could get into a period of litigation, or at least a lot of delays in terms of, well, where can you actually spend money?
Right.
What area is served, what area is not served. There's a broader problem, I think, which is, infrastructure is a business where it's like a jet engine. You advance the throttles, but the engine doesn't spool up right away. And so I think there are two main issues with trying to build a ton of fiber. One of them is supply chain. The amount of fiber out there fiber supply is not adequate to deal right now with the substantial increase. Part of the problem for that is global demand. So my data is about a year old, but as of end of 2020, China had something on the order of 424 million fiber to the home customers, not passings, customers.
Right. Because they built rapidly.
The rest of the world combined is about 120 million. So if you just look at fiber supply chains, right, and all the rest of that, you've got yourself a situation where all of a sudden, if you end up with a bunch of people now ordering fiber on the spot market without having put in place long-term commitments or aggregated buying, you're going to end up with prices going through the roof, right? Because you can't get at enough of it. Then there's another problem, which is labor. Splicers and all the rest of that. There are schools where you can go do that, but the Great Resignation and a whole set of other problems with the labor force. If you can't get splicers, you can't get fiber techs. It's not like 4-year stuff, but if you were really like, if you were an engineer and you were looking at this and you said, hey, I want to really pave the way for an advanced infrastructure in the United States on fiber, I would have put in place aggregated supply chain, getting more domestic production of fiber optic cable assemblies, et cetera, putting in place education and incentives to get job training programs and generate a workforce that can go out and actually do this. Because the worst thing that you could do is dump a boatload of money in and then have a bunch of people bidding, all with a constrained supply chain, because all you're going to do is spend a massive amount of money and not be able to build much.
Right.
Yeah, this is a great advertising moment. 2 weeks from today, it looks like we are going to have on 2 ISPs who are both rapidly scaling up and doing more. I know Travis has been scaling up, and so we're going to go deep on this subject of how does one scale up as a private company in these situations. So that is to come. Heather, you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I have been talking to a lot of people that are looking to beef up their education. Milo, a good friend of mine, runs a post-secondary educational institute here in Virginia that does more technical training and actually has the physical, they have a pole and all the field you can rip up, put in lines and stuff like that. And it's been incredibly difficult to find people that will come in and teach, let alone come in and learn. So I agree with you. I think the supply chain, and especially some of the smaller entities which they hope to get in the market, may not have access to these buying consortiums that are going to pretty much monopolize the supply. I agree. So fiber supply chain and labor issues are a big problem.
Yeah. I think about a year ago, or maybe 6 months ago, I read a deal. My friends at AT&T had, kind of deal with Corning, where Corning would spool up a new plant to build more fiber and their integrated assemblies. And so if you come into the market without any aggregation of demand, and you have to compete only on the spot market for fiber supply, and remember, it's the global markets, and there's big sucking sound in China because they're not done with their fiber deployment.
No.
They are still got the pedal down to the metal. You're going to end up with a lot of problems. And so this is the kind of thing where, that could have been handled as part of the legislation sooner, creating incentives, et cetera. And but again, that's
we had infrastructure week every week for an entire presidency, Milo. They didn't get around to it. I'm sorry.
Zing.
I just had to get that because Travis will be digging me later from the other direction. Travis, I don't want to spend a lot. I think there's a lot of things we can discuss. This is something that that we know we're going to be talking about more, so you don't have to empty both barrels. But any quick thoughts?
I mean, I think it's a real issue. The third leg of that stool is rate increase or on product and material. Just in the last year alone, it's between 30 and 50% for your cost for your for fiber, splice vaults, handholds, duct. It's crazy. I'm not really sure how anybody, especially a small player, puts together a realistic financial model looking out much past the next 30 or 90 days. And for us, we're already placing orders for 2024.
Right.
And I got a call next week with a vendor for some product that we're placing out to 2025.
Wow.
And you have to. But the biggest thing that I've learned from the distributors is they're not taking a lot of new customers. They're just trying to keep the customers that they have happy. So if you're a new entrant in the market, I think and you're buying out on the spot, like you said, the spot market, I mean, it's going to be very challenging.
Now, Travis, you keep trying to get me to build the network. So you just trying to get me to throw my life away here?
Well, I mean, I want you to learn the real pain out here in the world, right? The reality, when you're trying to keep your bank, your debtors happy, and God forbid these people that sign up for federal money, what they're going to have to deal with. There's a bumpy road ahead. Let's put it that way.
So at the same time, we now see Verizon talking about $25 a month for the fixed wireless. I don't know if it's always 5G wherever they're going to be doing it, but they seem to be making a bid there. And I'm curious, Milo and Heather, as we do see wireless moving perhaps more aggressively in some of these areas, is that going to gobble up large chunks or small chunks? Does it matter?
You still have to have the fiber to do the backhaul. So I don't see it as, I mean, it might be a good, drop play, but I just don't see it as undermining too much some of the supply chain issues that Milo was talking about. And in fact, we'll have different labor issues for deployment of the wireless network. So either way, you're facing constraints.
Well, I would just say you're going to see some amount of fiber being deployed by AT&T and Verizon as part of their trying to go build their C-band infrastructure, assuming this FAA issue can be sort of navigated. But Verizon's basically said they're putting their C-band stuff on top of existing macro cell sites. So there's not a whole lot of sites involved there. And one of the things when you talk about rural, it's probably useful to step back a little bit from an engineering perspective, right? Rural, there's my view is there's three kinds of rural in America. There's the rural that's outside of metropolitan DMA, like 7 miles from the Google campus in Mountain View. You're out and there's no broadband available, right? But you're close to a bunch of facility, but it's not available. It's not been deployed. There are small towns where you've got reasonable density in a small cluster, right? But they
often an old cable system. But
they're not necessarily interconnected. They don't have good what you would used to call intra-lata fiber for backhaul, and the density sort of tails off pretty quickly when you get out of town. And then you've got folks who are like 20 miles from nowhere, right? That latter amount is actually very small, right? So when I was at Google, we have great geospatial data, and we built a prop model system that allowed you to lever that geospatial data to do automatic planning for wireless, both fixed wireless as well as cellular systems. And in fact, we used that for several years. I was served on a board, a federal advisory board to the Secretary of Defense called the Defense Innovation Board. We put out a report on 5G at the request of the Secretary of Defense back in April of 19. And one of the things we did, we levered all that and computed, well, how many base stations do you need to get coverage and what speeds and all the rest. It's a great report. The unclassified version is available for download, and it's a good read. It's not meant to be a general policy document. It's meant to be read by the SecDef. But the classified version is much more interesting. If your listeners,
I'm going to go get that classification right after the call.
Adams, they should go get the DIB 5G classified version. But one of the things is, if you actually use cellular, you're not going to get a whole lot of population covered depending on what speed. And so one of the problems with what I would think of as a monolithic definition of peak speed of 120, right, or even 100, is it doesn't really, is that at 2 a.m? Is that, it's because when you put these systems under load, and certainly one of the things that people have seen with the T-Mobile fixed service is, when the mobile network is not busy, well, performance can be okay. But then when the mobile network gets busy, the monetization of mobile data is far higher than the monetization of fixed. So if you just think about how much money you pay for a gigabyte on the mobile side versus what you would typically use in a fixed scenario, they have way more money, right? So the carriers will always prioritize mobility users off common infrastructure. Now, if you're using stuff that's not aimed at mobile, but really optimized for fixed, you can do amazing things with fixed wireless, right? And if you put that on existing macro cell sites, we did some other analysis, indicate you get a lot of rural America covered at reasonable speeds, but you have to have access to spectrum. You have to be able to get on people's roofs, et cetera, to do installs, et cetera. So I think fixed wireless can be really quite compelling. I'm not so hot on the potential success of mobile guys trying to sell part of their mobile network to deliver fixed broadband, particularly in a model where, because of COVID, we have a lot of people working from home. So the traditional peak load where I move, nobody's at home, during the day, and they all are at night when people are not out. Those kind of models have really changed substantially.
One of the things that I've believed is that the future of wireless along those lines, Milo, like from a point of view of high quality connectivity, and like if I was to think about where is wireless going to be really effective in the future, I feel like it's going to be in more urban areas, competing with cable, being the second option in an area, as opposed to being the first option in a rural area. And I felt government policy should be trying to get a high quality wire out to everyone, and then letting wireless provide some of that competition that I think we need in the market. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that. That's sort of how I've seen things likely to go.
I mean, I think there is only one network, and that's the wired network. We just use a little bit of wireless at the end, whether it's Wi-Fi in your house or cellular, right? Or worse yet, sort of macro cell bandwidth. But there is really only one network, and that's the wired network. So we're only talking about a matter of degree. And if you don't have good fiber distribution in a city or in a county or in a state, you're not going to have good wired or wireless. I mean, that's just the physics of it, right? Because the wire, you're not going tens of miles with high capacity on wireless today. Mm-hmm. So that's the real challenge, and we don't have a particularly good story here in the United States, at least compared to many other countries.
Now, Heather, when you're dealing directly with local governments, do you still see this issue where they're wrestling with different technologies, or do they feel?
I have to say, the only benefit of the pandemic is that you don't hear that anymore. They all know that mobile hotspots or any of that garbage is not going to do it for them, that they need to be connected. or they need to have, as Milo said, the wires as close as possible. I mean, if they can get good connectivity in their house because they're close to fiber, I think all of that has gone away with the pandemic. Everybody understands that they really need good throughput, and the demand for fiber is, and that's one of the pushes, right? One of the reasons that we're seeing such demand right now when people haven't even started deploying the federal funds. And every community, I don't think communities are doing this anymore of should we wait for 5G, because they realize they got hosed waiting, and now they're all worried it's just not going to be enough. So I don't see that as a big issue anymore.
Well, I'm
I
glad
would
to hear
push
that.
back. I'll push back a little bit about that, and the reason I say that is, if you look at the networks, right? One of the things that was interesting in the pandemic, because the move to video conferencing, Zoom, and all of this, right? They're early in the pandemic, the networks were melting. And then what happened is all of the video conferencing providers, et cetera, had to make changes to deal with the limited DOCSIS upstream. And so the lesson from that is you're not going to get really a mass market product that requires a high performance upstream, because there's really not that much of America that can take advantage of it.
You build a product that nobody would want to buy.
Nobody wants to go build a service that very few people can effectively take. And so all of the applications had to constrain their use of network bandwidth to adapt to that. That coupled with the MSOs putting in place some additional remedies, et cetera. But if you just look at market share and you look at cable broadband market share and take rates, I don't think they're worrying about fiber. And like in my area, we have AT&T's built out fiber in my area, and they tend not, at least in every part of California I've visited lately, they don't build underground. So you can count how many people are taking the fiber by looking at the taps.
Yeah, I mean, Travis does that in the alleys.
You can just count. And it's not, take rates are not that great. I mean, part of the challenge is many of the operators who build fiber networks have not done much to differentiate their product.
And Wall Street analysts, I think, assume a 40% maximum take rate among the FiOS, the Frontier service, the AT&T service. From what I've read, I don't read a ton of them, but they seem to assume about a 40% maximum take rate. And we do not see that among the small private companies or the municipal companies or the cooperatives. Often the cooperatives are the only game in town, but it's an interesting distinction, I think.
You mean you don't see it because they all get higher take rates? Right.
They might hit, it might be like 2 or 3 years to hit 40%, but then, they're 43%, 44%, 46%. Like they don't stop growing.
But don't you think some of that is often they're the only high speed?
Right.
And
no, that's the thing. I mean, like Travis sees this, right? I mean, like the take rates in your neighborhoods that you serve first are still increasing.
Yeah, so our neighborhoods that we've been in the early years are over 70% take rate, but it gets to be less and less about the technology and more and more the customer service.
Right, exactly.
Do you answer the telephone if somebody has a problem and we roll a truck out and fix the problem within 30 minutes? Is it stable? Has the neighbor's internet hasn't gone down for 8 years? Those are the things that start resonating. And now that there's really decent streaming television options where you don't have to do the classic linear television. And I also hate to say this, as people age out and they sell their homes and, move to Florida or whatever, when the younger people move in, they'll move to the area specifically for high speed and high quality broadband.
Right.
We talked to the realtors in the area, and that's number one. I mean, quite frankly, when I move out of Minnesota, I want sun and broadband. That's it. Everything else, hell, I'll go down the street and get a bucket of water.
Travis, there is so much sun out there right now today.
And good caffeine. Come on, guys.
Yeah. Warm sun though, Chris, not this negative sun we have.
Yeah.
I want to address the question in the chat, Travis, after you go ahead and finish.
Yeah, so I guess I'm with you. We don't see any. We've been trying to figure out what is the maximum take rate in some of these areas, and after 12 years, we're still not there. but I think it's a lot. The technology's solid and the customer experience is solid. That's, they go hand in hand.
Travis, Hiawatha Broadband said they got up to like 65% in some of their rural communities.
I mean, look, I'll give you a funny story. In the at-home days, right, we were building cable broadband. In North America, what city had the highest take rate after 2 years?
NFL city?
Any city. What
city
do you think had the highest take rate for broadband? This was in the early days.
Boy, I have no idea.
Yeah, I would assume, sort of like a city with a lot of young people,
and techies, etc.
Yeah, so I would think like Vegas or Miami. I mean, obviously places in California sort of come to mind, but
no, Fort McMurray, Alberta, which was a uranium mining town north of the Arctic Circle, because there was nothing to do there outside.
Fort McMurray, Alberta. I don't even know where that's. Oh God, way the heck up there. Yeah. Well, you have nothing else to do. Broadband in a liquor store. I mean, there you go.
I mean, so it was that. I mean, it's interesting, right? Because it's a competition for time and a competition for what do you do, right, with your time if you can't go outside. And you're dependent on your internet connection for everything, right? In the early days, right? We didn't have a whole set of these sort of broadband dependent services today. And so I think that goes back to the issue of if you've got a rural community and you don't have access to certain things locally, you're going to be much more dependent on your network connectivity.
Right.
It's going to be much more core to you. The way I like to put it is the price for being disconnected has never been higher.
Right.
So I think, and that's and you see that in terms of at least the intent and desire on trying to fix the connectivity gaps in the United States. But I do think, for your viewers, go out and count the drops off the fiber taps. And many of the larger companies have not been that successful at pulling customers from the cable guys. And
but to Travis's point, and I live in a community that's new, so new relatively. It's less than 15 years old, so I have conduit.
Such a good age joke in there. I'm just not gonna take it.
Don't go there. You're already in deep shit with me over the last comment you made. So, my house has gone through, the previous owner went through some sort of metamorphosis. First they had DirecTV, there was an antenna on the roof, then they went to Comcast, and then finally they went to Fios, and I wasn't changing from that. But so I've had choices, and I have a choice, but it's interesting to hear the neighbors talk. And the only thing that Comcast offers, they have horrible customer service as always. Am I going to get sued for saying this?
No.
Their customer service is alleged not to be great.
People are saying. Thank you. But, and I've never had a problem with Verizon, but one of the things, what they have, Milo, that Verizon doesn't have? Peacock. So you can watch Yellowstone without paying for it. I mean, that's been one of the big draws this winter. You say people need to have things to do. It was the hot streamer this winter, but that's the interesting thing. What is the quality that will pull you into one provider versus another when you have choice?
Yeah.
And
so it's a complicated thing. I think thinking about a business where you're trying to differentiate only on your technology's raw performance is probably not going to help you well against competing against a cable operator who has relatively good infrastructure. And so you have to think about how do I do CDN co-locations? One of the things we did in Google with fiber, right? We made sure major streamers were directly attached to the fiber distribution system in every city. So you're literally 2 milliseconds away from the content server. People thought the video quality was outstanding because of the fiber. didn't actually have anything to do with it. It had to do with the co-location of the CDNs for Netflix and YouTube and Hulu and all the others. So there are things like that you can do to improve service, right? And then I think also it's not just about getting speed to the home, it's about getting speed through the home. And how do you do that and deliver that? Because if you're ending up being bottlenecked inside the home, the user's not going to see an appreciable difference in performance. And so it's really, you have to think about it from a system perspective. And I think all of this, none of this kind of conversation gets brought up when we're talking about government programs or bills or the rest of it. And I think, if you're building an area that has no choice, well, that's maybe you can get away with that.
But don't you think that's primary? I mean, yeah, there's a lot of talk about adoption and digital equity in the urban areas. And Chris may be right. That may be the area we encourage more fiber as the last mile alternative. But the real focus is getting infrastructure into these areas that don't have it today, or they have such a miserable low throughput that it's almost like not having it.
Well, I want to jump
I
in.
think that's the focus.
I think it is. I also think, you made a comment about Comcast, and I'll say I feel like they've upped their game a lot. I noted this on Twitter. My parents moved recently into an area with Comcast. Their customer service was terrific, and the gateway modem that they're providing was great. And then when my parents needed one, because they wanted to have the gateway in the basement, and it's kind of an interesting open house, but they still, all the way on the other side of the house didn't work well. Comcast was like, here's a satellite. People that are assuming it's going to be easy to compete against Comcast, I wouldn't make that assumption forever.
Yeah, no.
And that's where, and I think, there's not just one thing that will work against them, right? Because like you said, for one group of people, it's Peacock. For another group of people, it's maybe their only other option is a company they will never do business with again. Quest, when I graduated from college and I sent my resume out to a bunch of places, I moved and Quest turned my phone off for a week. They just screwed it up. And I had to go every day to a phone booth to try and resolve it, because nobody could call me about the jobs I was trying to get because I didn't have a phone, thanks to Quest's ineptitude. So that lingered with us for a while in terms of whether we wanted to do business with them again. For other people, it's a whole host of other weird little things. The number of Wi-Fi access points. There's all kinds of things. Yeah. But I want to ask. This is a question that I'm dying to hear. Milo in particular, and I don't know if Travis, if you've given more thought to it, but this Tirana fixed wireless is back. And this is something that I've heard about in my mind, in operating in the unlicensed spectrum in particular. This is sort of the new 5G thing. It's actually I'm seeing this more. I mean, when I started, it was you don't need fiber. We got Wi-Fi, and then it was LTE. No. Then it was WiMAX, and then it was 4G, and then it was 4G LTE, and then it was 5G. Now I hear people being like, "Oh, Tirana is amazing. It solves all of the problems."
So Milo, one quick second. I just want to interject something because Chris made a statement, and for anyone under the age of 45 years old, a phone booth was a thing that you would go down to. And there's a telephone on the wall, and you'd put a quarter into it, and you would be able to call people and then hang up and leave. I just want to make sure people understood what that was. But
Tirana,
I've heard it's the new magic mousetrap. I have not personally used it yet. I know it operates in the 5 gigahertz spectrum. I know that, a lot of the tricks you can do in 5 gig is not listen before transmit like Wi-Fi does, which makes it seem like it's amazing technology. But I can't comment specifically on this particular implementation. I don't know, Milo, if you've used it or not.
Yeah, I mean, I know those guys really well, and I will just say you will not find a company that has smarter folks on the fixed wireless side than them. The work that they've done in beamforming and in interference cancellation and management is really very, very impressive. And
I should, if I might, Milo, just briefly, I'll just note, it is not them that I hear bragging about it. It's some of the fixed wireless operators who I feel like are driving the hype through anything that is reasonable. Whereas the folks at Toronto may be terrific. I'm not accusing them of overhyping their product. I think some of their customers might be overhyping what it can do.
Well, I mean, so first off, I think a lot of folks have built WISP products out of basically sort of tweaked Wi-Fi radios. And when you operate with that, you're dealing with a certain set of limitations, but it's a great ecosystem from a cost basis and the rest. These guys built signal processing designed to do this with MIMO and a whole set of beamforming technology that has been maturing over a number of years, and it's pretty impressive. Now, obviously, it depends on spectrum, depends on what you're trying to do. But one of the differences in fixed and mobile, right, is you have many more degrees of freedom. You have I'm not talking to an antenna that's this small, right? And I don't have a battery-powered handset on the other side. I have AC power, and I don't have to deal. I have a much bigger aperture to work with, and so there's a whole set of things that you can take advantage of. I think one of the questions has always been, can the 5G community take advantage of these things and sort of duplicate a highly optimized fixed wireless system with maintaining full mobility integration? And to date, I don't think that's the case, right? And again, it goes back to, you got way more dollars per gigabyte for mobile service than you do for fixed. So, it's like, what am I going to optimize for if I'm an MNO? But I do think that the technology does enable, we've done a whole lot of work on wireless, and I did a bunch of work on CBRS and that whole spectrum sharing model. And I think as more spectrum comes available that is accessible to more people, you create opportunities for high-end technology to enter and solve some of these problems. And so the Toronto guys, I would just say, you will not find a smarter group of people in that space.
I think, Chris, what we should really do, because I think this is going to be a reoccurring thing, maybe we should try to get our hands on some equipment and set it up and see how it works, because we've been operating various 5 gigahertz platforms in the city here of Minneapolis for 20 years. And again, I always go back and say Ubiquity didn't do the industry any favor when they come out with $70 wireless products, and everybody else, it's a race to the bottom. So it would be nice to see, a properly engineered RF, radio and client.
But $70 in a market, we were talking before the show, I've done work with the United Nations on trying to bring connectivity in refugee camps in some of the really sad parts of Africa. And $70 is a lot of money.
Oh yeah.
And they're not capacity constrained, right? They don't have backhaul and a whole set of other dynamics there. So there are places for all of those kind of solutions. I think the question is really, what is your business model trying to optimize for? And if not everybody optimizes for a high-end experience, and that's about competition, right? If you don't have anything, well, and you can't afford much, well,
it's something. But when you're trying to compete against fiber and DOCSIS networks, it's very challenging. When you're the guys are trying to do it. If you've ever been to Wispapalooza, there's a lot of guys, giving it the old college try. But it's
and by the way, the WISP market is one of the few markets where you have an expanding number of players as opposed to a contracting number. So that makes it attractive from an equipment provider's perspective.
Well, what's interesting, though, is to watch how many WISPs are just really trying to educate themselves and start to deploy fiber now.
Right, right.
Yeah, that's very encouraging.
I want to go back, and I just want to say that, Travis, I think it's the idea you had there is terrific, in that we should test out this equipment in the same way that, Steph Curry and I, we could play basketball. I'm down to help you with that, but I think it's a great idea.
I think it would be interesting and I like to do this periodically every year. I have a whole warehouse full of every piece of wireless technology and just hang it up and see how it does. and I don't know, Milo and Heather, you probably don't know my current stance on wireless is what I'm really fearing is 14G. That's, I think, where it's really going to compete heavy with fiber. So since we're only at 5G today, I'd say we have some time.
Well, the nice, people, I have been on the Hill and been asked the question. It's like, well, if the U.S. can't compete with China and others for 5G, why don't we just focus on 6G? And I'm like, well, you don't have the fiber infrastructure to compete on 5G. You're not going to have
right.
It gets even worse at 6G when you go even higher up. I mean, again, that DoD study we did said if you wanted to deliver 100 megabits to one user at cell edge using a 28 gigahertz spectrum, millimeter wave, and I wanted to cover, I think it was 72% of US population, how many base stations would it take to deliver that? Outdoor only, assuming, it's not, you're not blocking it with your, the phones are just suspended in midair because, human beings tend to be, bags
Water
of
sex.
water that tend to be RF opaque.
Can we cut all the trees down too?
That
help?
Yeah.
So then that number turned out to be 13 million base stations.
Well, to give you an idea, in 58 square miles, which is Minneapolis, I've got 2,600 base stations running. The fiber attached base stations run very well. The non-fiber attached base stations, they run great in the winter when there's no trees or leaves. Boy, come July, it's a challenge, let me tell you.
Yeah.
And that's my whole point about why is the legislation favoring fiber? I mean, do I hear from a lot of people that are still concerned about 5G versus fiber? And I would say, I think we've won that war.
No, the question will be whether or not people can actually deliver solutions. And, if you end up in a situation, things are going to change with the midterms. I think that's very clear. I think you've got a solid legislative bloc who wants to see progress on rural broadband. But, if 2 years go by and how many homes are actually lit and delivering service is relatively small, and programs are all having heavy cost overruns because of supply chain problems, et cetera, you could have a very bad outcome to this that will leave a bad taste in Washington's mouth.
That's what not just that, but Heather, let me set you up because I think I'm going in a similar direction. And that's that this is where I think I really fully disagree with Brendan Carr, although maybe he, FCC Commissioner Carr, he just came out and said it's a disaster if we use rescue plan funds in any area where there's already some kind of service. And we actually just published right before the show started my response to that, which is in depth and perhaps less ad hominem than people who know me might think. But the thing that I think what you're just saying, Milo, is that people are seeing like, oh, like we're spending $42 billion on broadband. Like this is exciting. Like, I, Mr. Cable Monopoly person, am going to get some relief. My prices are going to go down. I have new choices. And no, in fact, we're going to spend $42 billion on fewer than 10 million households.
Right.
The
way things could go.
Part of that goes back to mapping, right? And one of the problems is the maps are notoriously bad, right? And you get situations where there's cable service available, but I have to spend $20,000 to extend the loop up a long hill from the street. Well, is that really available in that area or not? Or I have cell service that's available, but it turns out there's a pocket because of a shadow that's not covered there, right? Getting atomic unit data in terms of real household data is a challenge. And
so so this is a great question. I think Heather, go ahead. Then I want to jump.
I was just going to say that's the biggest problem I think is having to. Yes, we have to have the maps right, and that's A. But B, will they ever be right? And C, when are they going to deliver something? I think that's going to create some frustration too, Milo, because the maps aren't going to be ready in time to make much of it. Like you said, 2 years from now, how many homes are going to be connected because we won't get the frickin' maps minimum until the end of this year. And then everyone's going to challenge them. I mean, the smarter communities and states are the ones that are just saying, screw it, we're going to do our own mapping.
This is where
I think part of it, I just want to piggyback, You are not going to get perfect maps. So the question that you have to answer is, how do I want to deal with false positives, false negatives? If you say, I need to have maps that absolutely never cover someone who's already got the minimum connectivity, well, to get that standard, you're going to have vast areas that will be of disconnected people that will be labeled connected. It's just not the physics of how people do the maps is not that good. So you're going to have some tolerance on both sides to get to something practical. But it goes back to what's the real data, right? Indicate.
That's, I mean, Milo, I love that. And that's one of the reasons I've always loved talking to you, is that I think along similar lines, which is like, it's sort of like, I want to hit the bullseye perfectly. Okay, well, you're not going to do that. So where do you want to miss?
Right.
And that's the way I tend to approach these things. One of the things that a way of sort of asking this question is, maybe we need to go a different direction. And I think Dane Jasper had made an interesting point, which was, screw a lot of this stuff and let's ignore wireless for a second. Let's get everyone who owns infrastructure and demand that they just share their marketing database.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a number of ways of looking at that. I mean, I think there's actually a lot of right-of-way providers. One of the things that's always fascinating me is we are looking at this like we're going to build brand new infrastructure. But what percentage of the rural households that we're talking to are not grid connected? Very few.
Right.
So we have power infrastructure already runs to these places. So if it were me, and I was a state PUC, I would say, hey, I want to see all that electrical infrastructure be able to be reutilized for running fiber on top of it. And by the way, certainly medium voltage, you have to be careful about this. But, the utilities are one of the great underutilized right-of-way assets in this space, that if you had them fully invested and engaged, they could do amazing things, especially in rural, because they already have the distribution, they already have rights of way, they already have control of poles and a bunch of stuff. Instead, if you're going to have to go out and pull brand new poles, brand new routes, it's going to take you a lot more work. And so,
especially
about
the interesting thing, Milo, in Virginia, of course, they have passed a lot of legislation that encourages the IOUs in particular to deploy, but more for middle mile, because then they require you to get a different last mile partner. And the IOUs aren't really that fascinated with becoming a last mile provider. So there hasn't been a lot of pushback on that. But I think you're right. I mean, they're building the fiber optic network anyway for their own use. So it's no big deal if you can incentivize them to also put on middle mile broadband. But then the question is, where do you find their partners and how do you incentivize that? So I think you're right. I think we should be encouraging. But to your other point, the electric companies know where all those customers are.
Exactly right.
They could give us much better maps than relying on AT&T or Comcast to give us the map.
It's funny you bring this up, because I was just listening to a radio show the other night, just driving, and people were complaining about, hey, they tried to get these 4 free kits, COVID test kits that the Biden guys just
right.
announced. And it's like they go in, sign up, and it says they've already been delivered. Well, it turns out that they didn't understand which addresses were apartment buildings and which ones weren't, right? And so if you're in an MDU, how do you get that right? The addresses are amazingly hard to deal with.
That's what I want to. This is a question for you, Milo, because there's very few people I could ask this question of that might have an answer. How the heck is it the federal government hasn't run into this problem before? How does it not, whether it's through the post office or another place, how is it not just put in the money to develop an appropriate fabric of where all the freaking domiciles are and whatnot, and just to have this available for various agencies? I got to think it would be useful for a lot of things.
The post office actually has a pretty good database of this, but agencies tend not to cooperate with each other in this. I've dealt with people on the Hill and agency folks for a long time. The Postmaster General has no performance goals linked to broadband. That's not what he's measured by.
Mm-hmm.
The Department of Transportation has no performance goals or tasks that are how do you support broadband. If you wanted to pass an interesting bill or just the executive order, right? Make every agency head have to talk every report 3 months on progress, that what you have done to make resources available, rights of way, et cetera, to facilitate broadband deployment in the United States. And make that be something that's publicly reported every 3 months, right?
And have you noticed every administration starts this interagency cooperation? I mean, I think under Trump it was called the BOC. Is that unfortunate or what? But
baseball fan.
No, not that BOC, like an old Bell operating company, BOC BOC.
Gotcha.
So I agree with you. There's the lack of cooperation between the different government agencies for a common goal is really frustrating.
It's about coherence. And look, if it was important to the administration, they would make it be coherent.
Well, look at all the different funding programs and how they lack coordination.
Yeah. Well, some of that's statutory from the Hill, but I'm just saying, if you just look at the executive branch, right, there's a lot of things that could be done to make things be coherent, not to have to build new rights of way, make federal buildings and spaces available for towers. I mean, there's just boatloads of stuff that you could go do. But the fact is, nobody really cares about it.
I want to put an exclamation point on something. Travis, you leaned forward earlier. I think you might have a comment we want to get back to. But Milo, you made a point about all of the electric infrastructure and the different high voltage lines and things like that. There's another area in which it's really important to reuse infrastructure, and that's to avoid the delays of, in California, of CEQA, nationally of NEPA, of the various environmental studies that have to be done in different circumstances. If you can reuse things without disturbing the ground, you often can bypass a lot of cost and delays. So that's another reason to try to reuse that stuff.
Yeah, I would just say many of these regulations amount to a self-denial of service attack. You're basically putting in place processes that are designed to hose your ability to build. And there are consequences of that. And I actually think, this is one of the areas where it will be fascinating to see if you could actually in this build a competitive process where dollars would get awarded to states in priority order of where it's easier to build. Competition is a wonderful thing, and the federal government doesn't compete with anyone, but states do and cities do.
I love that idea. It's very difficult to measure. I'll just point out, a lot of people suggest that Vermont's one of the worst places to do business, more independent businesses than any other place. And so it also comes down to how we're going to measure ease of building and whatnot.
Exactly.
Travis, anything that you remember the point that you were going to lean in 5 points ago?
Oh, I don't even, I don't know. The whole polls conversation, if you've ever actually tried to traverse a city block, about 3 different entities that own the poles and their inability to want a third provider to come on board, and then cities no longer wanting aerial networks because it blocks the sun. It's that's why we ended up just deciding to do everything underground in the public right away. It takes a long time, it takes a lot of money, but at the end of the day, with the fiber infrastructure, I sleep really well at night with a very reliable, low latency, high quality product that's delivering to the customers. And 50% market share is pretty easy to get. But I have a theory on the other 50% is by taking 50% of the people off of the Comcast DOCSIS node in their neighborhood, the other 50% of people's experience is now just fine.
True.
So getting more, we're making their network better by taking off the heavy users, and then all the light users can enjoy the network. To Milo's point, eroding that the other half of customers can be challenging.
And Milo will appreciate that Travis suddenly found that near the airport, he had to figure out how to get a permit from the Air Force, which he had no idea how to do.
Well, if you've ever built a network, you would be amazed in an NFL city like Minneapolis, how many different people own pieces of dirt.
Right.
I mean, just you drive down the road and there's 7 different entities.
So again, one of the things one of the really interesting things for somebody to do would be to actually do an assessment that ranks states in ease of build, right? Like there, at one point, Michigan had a single permitting location where you could go and file permits, and the state forced everybody to deal with a coordinated permitting process. I think latter administrations changed that, but I think
railroads, because those are a real
yeah. See, this is the thing that people don't understand, right? About why right of way is so painful. But all of these things come from regulations that have established how the rights of way are administered. And there are lots of ways to deal with this. You could deal with it. I'll tell you what, you want to hear a sad story. So in the early days of fiber, we had a city up here. I won't say which one it is, but we have one of the founders lived there, and they were doing a major sewer reconstruction project because they had to deal with, a EPA rule about bad ties between your flood control system and the sewer. So they were redoing the sewer, and we were working with them to say, hey, why don't you pull fiber through that same underground construction, right? Mm-hmm. City manager was off on vacation, came back and goes, we're not going to do any of that. That's AT&T's job. It's not our city's job to do that. So this is the issue about coordination. There were 700 cities that had to rebuild their sewers because of EPA rules. And they were not allowed by the EPA to actually do joint builds with fiber because of a particular rule that said the only things that those project monies could be expended on was the remediation of the problem as part of the settlement with the city and their boilerplate. They were not allowed to pull fiber. If you wanted to do that, you had to go reopen the ground again and pull the fiber again.
It's funny you say
that. We tried to work the White House on this, and the White House was like, well, that's ridiculous. We should convince EPA not to do it. And then the only thing I spent the next 3 years trying to figure out whether or not they had done it, because I just kept hearing conflicting things over whether or not EPA had fixed that.
And then it's now it's a hot topic again, getting fiber in the sewer lines.
Well, I don't know if you have to get it in the sewer line, but at least if you're going to tear the ground open, you might as well allow conduit in, right?
But that extends out further. If like you would assume when they reconstruct a street, that would be the ideal time to put conduit in the ground. It's actually the most challenging time to put conduit in the ground. Coordinating with the 50 other construction people, all the permitting departments at the city, all the city inspectors. It's just better to have them finish it and then come in after and do it.
I disagree, Travis. It's better for them to do that a year before the ground is open, and so it's planned as part of the normal planning process.
You are, you are.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And the alternative, I think,
the irony is you would think that that's the ideal time to do it. Oh, it's terrible.
It probably would be the ideal time for the city to do it, which is in the middle of that. Travis, I understand that from your point of view, like your crews and everything else, you're trying to time it. It's a giant hassle.
To Milo's point, the city doesn't care.
Well, that's so cities that do care really should be doing this. Like,
care. We care, and the homeowners care. They really get mad at the city when I call them the taxpayers. The homeowner, the taxpayers, when they're because they want service, but the people in charge of putting the street down, they don't even get along with the other department in the city, the IT department or whoever else. So it's a big nightmare.
No, I agree with you, and it varies from city to city. There are cities that have public works that very much care about this.
Right.
That's totally right. And by the way, that's one of the things that whatever is done with that NTIA is going to do or SEC, et cetera, you should reward cities that manage this process and take advantage of this coherence and make sure that, if you're going to prioritize where limited amounts of supply chain and fiber go, prioritize it to people who actually can do it efficiently. And if you can set up that kind of competitive dynamic, I think you got a much better chance of success.
But isn't this where small towns are actually easier to build these networks in? Let's just say Heather's the mayor, Milo's in charge of city council, and Chris is the utility guy. Well, the four of us get together and we're like, yep, we do it and we move on. When you're dealing with an NFL-sized city, there's hundreds of people in the mix.
Exactly.
And they don't ever want to no one wants to say yes.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely think that is a major factor in it. We're running, to the point at which we're going to be taking a break. I did want to ask Heather and Milo. I'm curious if there's anything that, I mean, last year was full of surprises and challenges. Is there anything that really surprised you in the broadband space? Perhaps something that gave you hope, so like a positive surprise, but I'll take a negative surprise as well.
Well, I think the positive surprise was that they actually passed the infrastructure bill. I mean, come on, how many years has it been since they've talked about it and haven't done anything? The fact that it got passed was the shock, I think, of the year. It was sort of forever. That was a good surprise. And then like I said earlier, the only other positive thing coming out of the pandemic is we no longer have to have any community do a feasibility study on whether they need or want fiber. They know they need and want fiber.
Yeah, I mean, I guess from my perspective, I was a bit surprised by how much money was spent in the C-band auction, something close to $90 billion. And, one of the things I think many people tout that as a great success. Like, look at how much money you raised to the government. However, the government's running at, like multi-trillion-dollar deficits, right? And like, does 90 billion really matter in that space? And wouldn't it have been better if that $90 billion were used for funding backhaul, base station sites, and infrastructure actual deployment rather than paying for spectrum? So I think one of the tragic things is that a bunch of money got pushed into the government when that money would have been much better placed at actually building real infrastructure that delivers more bits to people instead of just coming into a government balance sheet that's already highly leveraged.
It's an intriguing point. Let me ask, how much of that, if we pass through $90 billion of savings to, let's just say, the three biggest wireless companies, effectively T-Mobile, AT&T, and Verizon, who I think spent the lion's share on that, right? Mm-hmm. How much of that really results in significant savings versus sort of like windfall benefits to investors and executive bonuses and things like that? Do you have a sense?
Well, I think the question would be, if you're going to spend that money towards actually building infrastructure, right? One of the challenges, U.S. MNOs have wireless margins that are globe leading. They're, I think, roughly in the 50% range, and most of the rest of the world's at the 25-30% range, right? So they're already highly profitable. The challenge is, where is there going to be growth? One of the really interesting things, if you look at census data, household income adjusted for inflation over the last 20 years, median household income adjusted for inflation over the last 20 years by quintile, right? Like by 20% segments. The top 20% did pretty well in the last 20 years, and the top 5% did extremely well. But the bottom sort of 80%, certainly the bottom 60%, basically it's flat. So, you're not going to get more ARPU out of people. The growth is all substitutionary. So where is that coming from? And that's part of the reason you see the MNOs doing flat rate pricing, unlimited, right? Because they couldn't get you. People can't afford to pay more money for that. So the question then goes back to, well, why should people spend the money on network upgrades? AT&T, I think, has decided to spend the money on giving you iPhone subsidies, because that locks customers in for 24 to 36 months if you spend, and you get a used iPhone back out of that. Is that a better return on CapEx than actually building network infrastructure? So, companies do what financially makes sense to them. That's why their shareholders buy their stock and why they're paid. I don't think it's unreasonable at all. But you have to look at that and say, is this really the best way for the United States to compete globally on an infrastructure basis? And are we going to develop the next set of mobile and fixed services that will go through the rest of the world, or will it be China that will be doing that, and we will be the laggard because of this gap in infrastructure, both mobile and fixed? That's That's a question, because 10 years ago, 10 out of the top 10 internet companies by revenue were all American. Today, only 6 are American and 4 are Chinese. And the question will be, what does that look like in 10 years? And so when we talk about infrastructure, it's really an enabler to the services that ride on top of it. And that's the part that I think is really important to be thinking through.
Excellent. I desperately just want to do a show, Milo, and have you help me assemble a guest list and be a part of talking about great power struggle, U.S. versus China. And I'm fascinated by it. I think it's tremendously important for the future of open society and whatnot. And I appreciate how we touch on some of that in this conversation. So with that, let me say thank you to Heather, to Milo. Thank you again, Travis. We have a show lined up next week with Doug. I think he's going to be here from the beginning this time. Kim McKinley. And then after that, 2 weeks after that, we're going to be having on 2 guests. Bob from Planet Fiber, I believe is the name of the company in New Jersey, and Monica Webb from Ting to talk about a variety of things, including scaling up, building more fiber in this current era, as well as some of the challenges around partnerships and thinking about that. So,
Chris, one final thought.
Yes.
Just so you know, I'm going to be on the road for a month with my LTE service, so the odds of me participating will be spotty at best.
Yeah,
so,
I just texted you to be like, we're going to do more of these shows, and you're like, yeah, thumbs up.
Well, I might find a payphone somewhere that I can get internet because the mobile internet over LTE, at least my experience, is horrible at best.
All right, we're going to figure it out. But thank you all for joining us. And this has been another fun conversation on Connect This.